Hey guys, Chili B here again. Today we're diving into Thalon, which is one of Ethlizards' pre-seed investments, and we're going to try and find out what it is, what's unique about it, and what gives it potential. As always, this is never financial advice. I'm a pretty average investor, and I'm definitely not telling you what to do, what to buy, or anything like that. And even if I was, you shouldn't listen to me anyway. Just before we start, a big thank you to Mitch from Thalon, who has been really responsive on Discord and has helped me get my head around some of the trickier parts of this project. Okay, now into the overview of Thalon. Interestingly, it's a trilogy of games coming out that are going to be interoperable and influence each other in some way. I'm not sure exactly to what extent the games will be interoperable, but in the white paper it does say that at the very least the assets are going to be able to move from game to game, so that's pretty nice. The first game in the trilogy is going to be an RTS. That's like StarCraft or Command & Conquer or Age of Empires. And if you jump into their Discord, you can see they've already got a bunch of the basic gameplay elements down, which is really impressive. Their expected launch date is in 2024, which from my perspective as a non-dev seems pretty realistic. And since we're in the middle of a bear market, I don't see that they have any reason to overhype and overpromise what they think they can deliver. So 2024 seems like a realistic release date, but they've also got significant updates planned for the RTS in the years following. Initially, it's just going to release with one faction, and then they've got 2 more to roll out after that. The other 2 games are expected in 2026, and one's a city builder and the other one's a tower defense. So if you're familiar with those types of games, you can already imagine how the 3 of them could work together pretty well. So far timelines seem realistic, and the general concept of these 3 games working together seems really synergistic as well. These next 2 things, their values and their strategy, aren't really about the game per se, but they're definitely worth mentioning. These are screenshots from their Twitter account, but this is in their white paper as well. And I take it as a really good sign that they're sharing their values and their strategies on such broad platforms. I don't think you really see that with other games, and possibly other games aren't really thinking about that. But from my perspective, you've got to get your values right to really know how to make decisions that align with your goals in life. Their values, they say, are game first, community, communication, and long-term thinking. Those are really broad, but if we look at their strategy, which is on the top right, you can see how it plays out in some really concrete ways. So their strategy to make Thalon a long-term success is to create a fun game, to build seamless onboarding processes for non-crypto players, and to design a sustainable economy. That second point, onboarding non-crypto players, I think is really good that they have it in there, and it's really important for the time being because crypto is such a small part of the market. But if we're thinking really long term, like 10 years, then the strategy of onboarding non-crypto players kind of becomes redundant because it'll just be done by default in the space, in the Gamefi space. Or hopefully by then it's just called the gaming space. So really it's strategy 1 and strategy 3 that I'm really concerned about. And those are 2 really essential strategies that they have to nail for this game to be a success. If you're around for like the first gen of blockchain games like Axie and those sorts of games, then you know and you've learnt the lesson that you can't build a game that's not fun and doesn't have a sustainable economy. So if that's on their radar, at the very least, they're going to avoid the mistakes that Axie made, or at least not make them in the same way. But what I'm taking away from this is that their values have really clearly led to their strategy. They basically value fun games and long-term sustainable games, and their strategy is basically to build a fun game that's long-term sustainable. So in itself, it's not revolutionary and it's pretty blindingly obvious, but the fact that they line up and the fact that they're talking about it in public, I take as really good signs. Alright, let's jump into the game loop and how NFTs fit into that. First, and really importantly, we need to clarify that this is a free-to-play game. It involves NFTs, but it's totally free to play. As I mentioned before, we've seen the whole play-to-earn bubble, which I guess was really more like a pay-to-play-to-earn bubble, and it didn't really work. But Thalon is free to play, which I take to implicitly mean it's going to be a fun game. To start the game, you create an account, and then you're given a starter pack, which includes some units and upgrades, which are elements of the game. From there, you've got everything you need to play a game. So you can play PvE, player versus environment. So basically you're playing AI, or you can play PvP and play against other people. At this point, it's basically your standard RTS. But in either of those modes, you have this really interesting mechanism of side quests, which I think is worth mentioning because I haven't really seen the concept in an RTS before, and it sounds pretty fun. Basically, at some time in the game, all the players get an alert for a quest, and the quest is basically to get a relic which is guarded by a monster. And if you get the relic back to your base, you get some high-level units or upgrades that help you out for that game. Presumably, if you get it, it's a huge bonus, and if your opponent gets it, it's a huge negative. So it's a really simple idea, but then it opens up a whole bunch of new tactics and options. I'm imagining you'll have to make decisions about if it's worth sending the military resources there to try and beat the monster, or if you just let it go and let your opponent fight them. Or I'm assuming you could maybe go there and just steal the relic after your opponent beats the Guardian, or you could attack your opponent's base while he's trying to get the relic, or a ton of other options. So it adds a really nice element of risk in the gameplay, because I think at super high levels, RTSs are like so precise, they've got the timing of buildings down so much that it almost takes out some of the natural chaos of playing, and I think this side quest element adds it back in. So that's the basic gameplay loop. You have your regular RTS plus this side quest element. But specifically when we're talking about PvP, there's this other interesting element. If you win, you get a bounty box. And inside that bounty box are units or upgrades or some THL tokens, which we'll talk about later, or land skins, all sorts of other stuff. But you can't open it. To open it, you need to pay in USDC or ETH. Then once you open it, those are NFTs that you now own, and you can take those into your next PvP or PvE. But at this point, it's starting to sound a bit like this game is just pay to win. So you might be a good player, but if you're not a good player with extra money to spend on these bounty boxes, then you're going to start to fall behind. But that's where a second really innovative element starts to come in. And that's the PowerPoints algorithm. So with most RTSs, you go into the game with the potential to completely open up the tech tree, depending on how you build and stuff. The exception to that might be campaign mode, where you slowly open up the tech tree as the story goes on. But if we're talking PvP, you can generally open up the whole tech tree. But in Thalon, part of the game is selecting a subset of the available tech tree pre-game, which brings planning and synergies and counters and all of that sort of stuff into the game before you even start playing. So that means two people, even if they're playing the same faction, could come into the game with two really different builds of armies and have a really unique experience between the two of them. What the PowerPoints algorithm does is it dynamically takes into account things like damage and armor and range and special abilities of the units that you're choosing to bring in, and I'm assuming things like the upgrades as well, and it gives them a score so that players can create fair matchups between them. But the interesting thing, well actually that was already interesting, the even more interesting thing is that fair doesn't have to mean equal. If you're an amateur playing against a pro, the pro might take a handicap of power points and give you the composition advantage because he's got the skill advantage. And so things balance out in that way. This system, I think, enables a lot of fun and fair gameplay, even between players of mismatched skills. And probably, or at least potentially, implementing this system on top of the bounty boxes helps you to avoid pay-to-win situations. Another really clever thing that they've implemented. One final thing worth mentioning about the gameplay loop is the ability to spend THL, which is their token, to purchase in-game production boosts, which are just like short-term increases in your harvesting capacity, which have some sort of limit of use and cooldown. I think in terms of economy and revenue generation, this is pretty genius, because if you're in the middle of a game and you feel like you're falling behind and this guy is someone you really want to beat, you'd probably spend $1 or $2 to do it. And I can imagine tons of people spending money on these production boosts to do it. But again, this seems to be bordering on pay to win. And of course, to prevent pay to win, the teams filtered the production boosts through the PowerPoint system as well. So that's the basic gameplay loop. Get your starter pack, play some games, win some games, get some bounties, get new units, new lands, new skins, new whatever, change up your team composition, go back in, play another round, and experience basically a whole new game. Hopefully you win, get more bounties, new units, new games. To me, that sounds really simple and really replayable as well. Then on top of all of that, they have seasons which go for about 3 months, and leaderboards and rewards for people at the top of the leaderboards. Something you'd expect from anything trying to be a competitive game. I'll address land separately now, because it kind of has its own gameplay loop, which is a bit more of a meta gameplay loop, which I actually maybe find a bit more interesting than the game itself, because it sounds a bit undefined and there's kind of this infinite element to it. I think you'll see what I mean as I explain it. Okay, so each game takes place on a plot of land, but you don't have to own the plot of land to play. You can actually play on other people's lands. And in fact, if you're the owner of a land, you want other people to play on your lands. The plan is that there'll be 50k of lands in total, and you can see the split up between tiers 1 to 4 there on screen. An interesting path they've taken is to not sell higher tier lands, but to have people upgrade to them from low tier lands, or basically to earn it. So you start off with your tier 1 land and you customize it, and if you want you can stake it and you get some rev distribution, which we'll talk about a bit later as well. And if people claim bounty boxes on your land, you actually get a cut of those fees, which is why you really want people to be playing on your land. And you also have access to the possibility of getting some rare assets. As you increase the tier of your land, you get the ability to customize more parts of your land in different ways. You get access to a higher percentage of revenue distribution when it's staked, but the exact percentages aren't confirmed yet. Get access to a higher percentage of the bounty box fees and a higher chance of accessing the rare assets. So higher tier lands are better than lower tier lands in every way, but you have to earn it. What's really clever about this upgrading path is what it takes to upgrade. There's 3 criteria to upgrading your land. The first is it has to reach X amount of plays, whatever that number is. The second is that you have to have Y amount of bounty box claims, whatever that's going to be. And the third is you have to pay some THL. And the reason that's really clever is because it incentivizes landowners to generate really good content, to create really good maps for people to play on. And that's a huge bonus to everyone that's involved. It's a bonus to the game itself because they have a massive supply of basically free content creators and a huge choice of hopefully good maps. It's a benefit to the players because they get to play on fun maps and they'll have ever-changing maps and they'll never run out. And it's a benefit to the landowners because they get paid based on how good and how playable their map is. So it's a massive win for everyone. Also, the need to pay some THL is a nice touch because I think it gives higher tier landowners some skin in the game, because you'd only really outlay extra money to upgrade your land if you have some intention and some inclination to try and make a better map so that you can earn more money from it, and at the very least make back the THL that you pay. So basically this whole land system is a self-selecting system for keen map makers, especially as the tiers go higher. And the THL payment idea is like a filtering mechanism, separating the more serious map makers from the more casual map makers. So pretty genius, I think. The whole land system seems to be geared around incentivizing users to create really good content. And user-generated content, I think, is the secret to a long-term sustainable game, which matches their value of long-term thinking and their strategy of creating a sustainable economy. I really love all these tweaks that they've made to the basic RTS genre. So to summarize all of that, the land gameplay loop is get some land, you customize it, people play on it, people claim bounty boxes, you get a cut of the earnings, and then you customize it more. and then more people play and claim and you earn more. And then at some point, hopefully you've made enough money from your map making skills and you can upgrade your land and make even more money, presumably having fun in the process. All right, let's have a think about the investment loop and THL now. So THL's their ERC20 token, which is just used to direct and to reward value added to the system, same as every other token in every other ecosystem. This token has a 1 billion max supply, and there's a percentage burned with each transaction. I'm assuming that's with each in-game transaction that uses THL, not kind of every transfer or every swap on Uniswap or something. As we've already mentioned, we can use THL to upgrade land, and we can use it for the in-game production boosts to get a boost to harvesting speed. One thing we haven't mentioned that we can use it for is governance. I'm not really going to dive into that, but same as most DeFi, Gamefi platforms, you can vote on things. Thalon isn't yet a DAO, but it will be a DAO once the token's released. For now, I assume the team makes all the calls, which I think in early stage projects is generally a good idea. I won't dive into it any more than that, just because it's all up in the air at the moment. But I think the most interesting thing we can use THL for, at least in terms of investment, is staking. So you can stake THL, or you can stake an LP position of THL and ETH into their staking contract for a period of 0, 6, or 12 months. And depending on how long you stake for, you receive a different weighting multiplier for how much rewards you get from your stake. So if you stake at 0 months, you get a 0 multiplier. If you stake at 6 months, you get a 1.5 multiplier. And if you stake at 12 months, you get a 2x multiplier. If you're an Illuvium investor, or if you've looked into Illuvium, that should sound really familiar. And this whole staking system should sound really familiar. So while you're staking, you receive liquidity mining rewards, which are locked for 12 months, but that doesn't quite last forever. Jumping to their tokenomics page in their white paper, we can see that liquidity mining has been given a 20% allocation of the 1 billion tokens, which is 200 million. So at some point, I'm not sure how long, that'll run out and there'll be no more liquidity mining rewards. But for now, while there is, you get your rewards. As you get them, they'll be locked for 12 months. After the 12-month period, they unlock and they become regular THL. And then from there, you can sell it or use it to upgrade land, use it for production boosts, whatever you like. There is also an STHL token, or a synthetic THL token, which is separate but related to the THL token. I won't go into the details of it now. It doesn't affect this system too much, so I'll just mention it and then leave it aside. But if you're familiar with Illuvium, you know exactly what that is. So at the end of that loop, your question might be, what happens after liquidity mining rewards have ended? And the answer is there's actually a second loop that runs in parallel to the liquidity mining loop. And that's the revenue distribution loop. So when you stake, you don't just get liquidity mining rewards, you actually get revenue distribution as well. And that's the distribution of the revenue that the game generates. So when someone claims a bounty box, they have to pay a small fee, you get a cut of that small fee. Specifically, you get a proportion of 80% of it, depending on how much THL you have staked. And the Thalon treasury gets 20% of it to reinvest straight into the game. This part isn't fully confirmed yet, it's not locked in. But if it works the same way as Illuvium RevDiz works, it means you get the THL as unlocked THL immediately. So there's no waiting period for it to unlock. So liquidity mining, the yellow loop, has a cutoff date. One day the 200 million will be used up and there'll be no more liquidity mining rewards. But revenue distribution, the red loop, can potentially go on forever. If the game's popular enough and if enough people are playing and spending, then you'll just keep getting revenue distribution. The last thing to mention in regards to THL and staking is that you can stake Wormhole and Genesis Avatar NFTs, and by doing that you earn a boost on the liquidity mining rewards. Not the RevDiz, but just the liquidity mining. I think at the moment there's only 50 Wormhole NFTs, and I don't think the Genesis Avatar NFTs have been released yet. so it makes them pretty highly sought after. So far, the first and only sale of a wormhole went for 5 ETH, I think. Okay, let's finish up by thinking about their second mover advantage. And also with that, I guess the advantage of starting in a bear market as well. What this brings, I think, is the ability to learn important lessons from games that came before, and also the ability to not have the pressure of unreasonable timelines because of hype or whatever else. You could see already from their tokenomics that they learnt a lot from Alluvium and have implemented a bunch of lessons from them. Now we're basically going to dive into a part of their white paper where they talk about other lessons they've learned. In it, they outline 5 mistakes that they saw earlier projects make. One is token rewards. They saw that most players would do whatever it took to get tokens, but then as soon as they got the tokens, they would sell them, or the majority would sell them. And the only ones that held the token were ones that were hoping the token would appreciate in price and then they could just sell it at a higher price. 2 was only playing to earn. The focus of their game time was to extract value from the ecosystem, not just to enjoy the ecosystem or to have fun playing. 3 was pre-purchasing NFTs, which basically drove up the barrier to entry for later entrants, which effectively reduced demand for the NFT and indirectly for the whole game ecosystem. 4 was asset inflation, people generating unlimited amount of NFTs or unlimited amount of tokens, which basically drove up the supply. And 5 was difficulty onboarding new players, probably for a variety of reasons, but basically that meant demand was down because not many new players joined, the old players left, and they were stuck with a dying economy. Those are the 5 things they observed. In my opinion, they basically fit into 2 categories. One is playing to earn and not playing for fun. That's problem 1 and 2. And the other one is a problem of supply and demand, which were problems 3, 4, and 5. It's really interesting to note this basically matches with their values and their strategy. Playing to earn and not for fun basically means that those creators before didn't put the game first. And then having poor supply demand means they didn't have long-term thinking about their tokenomic structure. Both things that Thalon is trying to prioritize. And this, I think, is an indication that their core values are really, truly embedded into the team and into the design of the game, and not just lip service to please the crowd. Their solutions to these problems is what's interesting to analyze, I think. They've got both NFT-based solutions and token-based solutions, but I'm just going to concentrate on the NFT ones because I think they're the more interesting ones. So their first fix to this set of problems is to implement NFT rewards as opposed to token rewards. And what they're hoping that'll do is shift the focus from gathering as many tokens as possible to a focus on asset ownership. Because you can see in what we've covered earlier, the NFTs that they're emitting have functioned within the game and function to make the game more fun and to make the game different and replayable. Their second fix really overlaps with the first one, and that is to have the NFTs improve the gameplay experience and take people from only playing to earn to playing to collect to improve their game experience. Basically, to play for fun. Their third and fourth fix is to have a free-to-play game that's also fair launch. So free to play as in you don't have to pay a single cent to start playing the game, and fair launch as in no NFTs are sold before the game is released, so everyone starts on an even playing field. That'll hopefully lower the barrier to entry, which was created by pre-purchasing NFTs, and also make it more enticing for new players to join later on in the game, hopefully then driving up demand. Their fifth fix is to have a fixed max supply of NFTs so that they can't mint them into infinity and dilute the supply to the point where no one wants them anymore. The exception to this is the starter pack, which will have unlimited minting and basically be worthless, but that's the intention of it. The sixth fix is interoperable NFTs, so the NFTs will be able to be used in a variety of games, and again that should drive up demand and increase onboarding of new players as well. If one player likes one title in their suite of games, they've automatically got an entry point into the other games. And then their last fix is user-generated content. And this is really the holy grail of any game. Once users are enabled and are the ones generating the content for the game has basically a limitless life because users have basically limitless creativity. And the primary example of that is Warcraft, where user-generated content basically launched whole new genres of games. So we saw that that's already implemented kind of in the land play loop. And the idea is that they might extract value in the form of THL or whatever else. But the hope is by generating the content to extract that value, they actually add more value in terms of fun to the game and to the ecosystem. So I like what they've done with their NFT system, and I like how it's all geared towards fixing these 5 problems that they saw in earlier games. Okay, really quick pause before we summarize. If you've liked this content, and if you liked me covering Thalon, just let me know in the comments below and I'll keep covering it. It's a game I'm really interested in, so I'll probably keep up with it myself anyway. But if you like this stuff, then I'll create content on it for you guys as well. And on top of that, please give me a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate. So here's my summary of what we've gone through with Thalon. They've got really innovative gameplay. I'm not sure how much of it is totally unique to them and how much of it has come from another game, and I just didn't know. But the way they've packaged this seems super unique to me. Their side quests add a really interesting twist and a bit of chaos to the regular RTS genre. Their PowerPoints algorithm allow people to collect NFTs, really customize their team composition and boost it without being overpowered and without forcing an unnatural and therefore unfun sort of equality. Same thing for the production boosts. And their land system, I think, really stands out. It seems really well thought through, and the natural incentives it brings for user-generated content, I think, really is the holy grail of games. If they can nail that and they can get users to want to generate good content for the game could potentially last over a decade. They've also got really good value accrual mechanisms. They've clearly learnt lessons, or they've seen mistakes in the past and they've taken some steps to avoid those same mistakes in their own game. Time will tell if they've done that well or not, but from what I can see, supply and demand is handled really well. And importantly, there's a really clear value proposition. There's a really clear reason to hold the THL token, and there's a really clear reason to hold land. And that can't be said for a lot of blockchain games. And then finally, I love that they've shared their values and strategies as well. That doesn't directly influence the game, it's not really a measurable thing, but the fact that they've got clear values, and that's led to a clear strategy as well, and that we can see clear hints of the values and strategies playing out in the game design already, is a really good sign. I take this as an indicator that the team, when it comes down to it, and when they have to make hard decisions, will be able to make them in the best possible way. So basically everything I've looked at looks solid and there's no massive red flags that jump out to me. But the main question is, can they execute it? They have a pretty big vision, 3 games over about 4 or so years, and they've got lots of new innovations. So if they pull it off, it's got the potential to be huge. But from this early point, it's a pretty big unknown if they'll pull it off. I'm definitely hopeful that they will. Their progress so far makes me think that they will, but I'll be keeping a close eye on how they progress over time, especially as the token generation event comes out and as they get closer to releasing the RTS, which is still a year away from this point, so quite some time. Lots of things can happen between now and then. But that's basically it. That's Thalon explained. Hopefully now you have a good idea of what Thalon is and why it's got potential to be an absolute killer game. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a like and subscribe.